co-directing the Park Street Corporation Speaker Series in Health, Humanity, and Ethics. So welcome to the second event in the 2018-19 Speaker Series. As many of you know, the series has been made possible by the generous bequest from the Sullivan family in honor of the late Father Quinn, whose dedication to community conversations about social justice have found a legacy here as we welcome speakers on topics related to the larger conversation about health, humanity, and ethics. Tonight, we have the privilege of hosting not one speaker, but two, a couple, Karl and Sally Roux, who work together in the field of rural health in South Africa, along with their three children who are also here with us tonight, Emma, Johan, and Davy, who are back here. So I met Karl and Sally Roux about 18 months ago in Zithulele in the Eastern Cape, South Africa. My husband Jacques, here, also in the audience, had learned about Karl's work. Jacques is from South Africa, and he had learned about Karl's work and reached out to him to see if he might be interested in a pilot Jacques was developing that measures stockouts in rural pharmacies. We were in South Africa that spring, where Jacques is from, visiting his family, and Karl invited us to come spend a few days in Zithulele. Jacques knows the area a bit, but I had no idea what to expect, never having traveled in the Eastern Cape and knowing nothing about rural health practices, either here in the US or overseas. The countryside surrounding Zithulele is, to my mind, incredibly beautiful. It also felt very far from anything like a city. People had been warning us not to drive at night. I wasn't sure why until the last hour of the trip, when we reached the narrow dirt road shared by 2 lanes of traffic, herds of livestock, and people walking in groups, sometimes 3 or 4 across, heading home from school or work. There seemed to be no lights anywhere in the valley. That may well have changed because I knew they were bringing solar panels. We arrived late, though, thanks to my dutiful prodding well before dark. Jacques can testify to that. Nothing could have prepared me for the warmth and energy of the community I found when we arrived at Zithulele, a community of young doctors and health workers and pharmacists congregated in the residences adjacent to the remarkable hospital where Karl and Sally worked. In the few days of our visit, we had the chance to see parts of that hospital and to accompany one of the doctors driving out to rural clinics to see patients. But what I remember most vividly is sitting at the table with Karl and Sally and their children. The atmosphere felt sort of halfway between a high-level conference and a party. There was a palpable sense of energy, both social and intellectual, of problems presenting themselves and solutions getting formed in real time. Sally, in the midst of planning for the opening of Zithulele's first school, showed me bookshelves of Kosa and English books she'd ordered. She explained the urgency of founding a school and the challenges of pivoting from medicine to education. Fitted in with plans for HIV rounds the next day, there were the schedules of the 3 kids to sort out, including a piano lesson for Emma, which I believe was a 45-minute drive away, maybe a bit more. They'd invited people over for dinner to meet us, but as I remember, Karl and Sally's door never stopped opening. People kept popping in to say hello or to borrow things. Coffee, a lamp, do you remember the lamp? Or to drop things off for Karl or Sally to review, either for the hospital or for the school. Their home felt like the hub of an energy center. It was a privilege to get a sense of just some of what Karl and Sally are accomplishing and to learn more about the community they serve. I suspect I was hardly the first visitor to feel several days later, surprisingly sad to leave. Now just a few background details. Sally qualified as a doctor at the University of Cape Town, UCT, in 2000, and has a master's in international health from Uppsala University and diplomas in the management of HIV and child health, and has a special interest in pediatric HIV. In 2016, she became the founding principal of the Zithulele Independent School and spends most of her days teaching grades 1 and 2s, but still works in Zithulele Pediatric HIV Clinic every week. Karl also qualified at University of Cape Town in 1999 and also has a master's in international health from Uppsala with diplomas in obstetrics and anesthetics. He was the chairperson of the Rural Doctors Association of South Africa from 2008 to 2012 and is an honorary lecturer in the primary health care directorate at UCT and the family medicine department of Walter Sisulu University. Since 2013, he's run 3 longitudinal studies in the communities around Zithulele Hospital, examining what happens to babies born at the hospital and their mothers over time. His special interests include HIV medicine, providing good maternity care, the role of community health workers in primary care, and how to make rural hospitals sustainable. And he just mentioned that he might be starting a PhD, but you can ask him more about that later. Sally and Karl are currently teaching a policy task force about maternal and child health in South Africa at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. So please join me in welcoming Sally and Karl.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I feel like we can only be very boring after that amazing introduction. We thought that we'd start off with just a little video to give you a sense of where we are and to maybe start a bit Amy's description of the Eastern Cape and the area around Zithulele Hospital. And then we want to talk a little bit about our journey there, how we got there, what it's been like to be there for the last 11 years or 12 years. And we hope that we can also get a chance to get some of your questions and your thoughts. It's always great to come to context like this, and we really value the liberal arts tradition that you see in so many American universities. My dad's an economist, and in the South African way of doing things, medical doctors get trained in a 6-year training, go straight into medical school at the age of 18 or 19. And he's always said, that you doctors don't really have that education. You have a training, but you don't have an education. But I feel like it's very nice to hang out with some of you guys with really getting an education, and we look forward to hearing your questions and your inputs later. So let's just start with the video, and hopefully you can see that and hear that well.
It's an incredible privilege to serve people.
So it starts off with our two colleagues who got to the hospital first about 12 years ago.
It's an incredible privilege to serve people. And it's a privilege to be able to do so often in their hour of need. I mean, especially in this part of the world, people don't have other access to health services. So it's a weird thing, and so it gives me a kick. It's a great place to live.
I always wanted to work in a rural area. I wanted to work somewhere in Africa. I chose medicine so that I could work in a rural area and give of myself in some way.
There was a real shortage of staff here, and so they said, we want you to go to Zithulele. So we were like, well, where's Zithulele? What's Zithulele about? And it was a small place then, but we came and we literally spent 2 hours here. We walked around and we just knew this was very much the right place for us.
So when we first came, the challenge was isolation and pioneering.
When we started out, we had a sense of a dream of what we hoped to see happen here. We had some strategies, but it's been amazing to see the incredible people who've come to join us along the journey.
We said to them, we'd be more than happy to commit 5 years to helping you kind of establish the stream, because we think it would be much easier if you did it with a core group of 4 of us rather than just the 2 of you. I'd always been sort of interested in the idea of rural medicine and being a rural generalist, because I always thought that was a really nice medicine. You're a real doctor, you do a bit of everything, and that's the kind of medicine that really appeals to me, being a family doctor, knowing patients over long term, being able to look after them and in the context of the community.
The community is incredible, and it really feels like we are making changes here.
When we first came to the hospital, people had an inflow of different doctors every 2 or 3 years, and so they were tired of being told this is the way to do things, and then 2 years later, this is the way to do things.
A piece of advice that one of the professors that we regard as a mentor gave us was, if you're going to a place and you plan to be there for 10 years, tell people that from the beginning, because they'll treat you differently, and we did that.
The clinical manager referred one who came in 2005, with the vision that we want to take this hospital somewhere.
We set up really not knowing quite how we were going to achieve the dream, but but really working off the premise that there are a lot of people who want to do good things, and if we can create the context for that to happen, then hopefully those other people will see that and come and join in.
But today we are where we are because of a teamwork with the clinical management, so that we make sure that we attract and retain staff. Come the years that today we are saying to you, we've got so many physiotherapists, we've got occupational therapists, we've got dentists, we've got doctors, we've got things that we couldn't dream of. We've got audiometries, that's people taking care of ears of people, of which, some years ago, it was a dream.
I think that we have very little to do with the quality of people here. That's providing a core that allows other people to take the step is probably the only thing we can take any credit for.
I am in awe of the people that work alongside us. I feel like it was our dream, and so many people have taken on their dream, and I think that's an amazing gift for us.
I've been here since 2009 in February.
Babies just breastfeed.
I love babies. I lost my baby. My baby was 5 months, so was mismanaged. Then I said, because I didn't know anything about babies, how are the babies sick? How can I identify that? So wherever I go, my interest is with the little ones. Okay, I do love moms, but not that much. Baby, we're not so cute.
There's change on so many different levels. We've seen a massive increase in the number of deliveries, for example, that we do. We've managed to achieve a decrease in the perinatal mortality rate, which is obviously really important to us. Child health, likewise, we've seen a significant decrease in the mortality rate in the pediatric ward. We really believe that in a rural context, the district hospital needs to be the hub of providing care for a community. So we've been committed as soon as we had enough people to just get around the wards, to actually go out as well to the primary healthcare clinics and see people as close to their homes as possible.
Mama. We try to go out as much as we can, and then on the way to the clinic, we will do a home visit. How's it breathing, Mama? Love to do home visits. Home visits is your opportunity to really understand where the patient is coming from. Is she ever so it's my first time here today, meeting this little girl. She's 5.5 years old, and she has cerebral palsy. Basically, we're going to turn around. I think for me, some of the most wonderful experiences I've had is when a patient tells you that they've been heard. They feel like you've taken the time to listen to them and really see them. And if you've come out to their house, you've just taken the time. Oh, you're a happy girl. And that look on their face when you see that they see that they've been cared for. The feeling you get from that, I can't explain it. It's like really being alive.
We put it on our website that we're originally a mission hospital and maintaining much of that ethos, and I think that's true, that people here care about patients.
And that's kind of the core value that goes through.
And I think that the thing is not just prioritising their care, but really seeing them as people.
Even though we're in a context that's difficult, we sometimes are under-resourced, we sometimes don't have the right equipment, everybody's attitude is let's try and do the best we can for this patient.
There are days when it feels completely overwhelming and when it's tiring to fight the same battle that you fought last week and last month and last year, but that's how change comes. I think the thing that really brings joy is making a difference to people's lives, and sometimes that's just a really small little thing, and sometimes it's something more dramatic and sexy like saving lives, but whether it's small or big, it's about making a difference to individuals' lives and letting them know that they're valued.
Can everybody hear me okay? Am I coming on the microphone and you can hear me there as well? Good. So, if we want to talk about South Africa and about where we work, it's inevitable that we have to talk about the difficult history that we've had in South Africa. And I think that most of you will know of the word apartheid, meaning separateness, literally. But our history goes much further back than when apartheid was put kind of formally into legislation in South Africa, kind of after the National Party won the election in South Africa. And these were obviously only white people were able to vote in the election in 1948. But that was when it became visible to the world, and when racial legislation went into the laws of the country. But of course, South Africa's got a colonial legacy going back to 1652, and a few kind of markers on the way to that really had an impact on the way things are today. And in the New York Times, just I think yesterday or the day before, there was an article about the fact that economic apartheid is still very much alive and well. And it started with one of the big things that had an impact on this was the 1884 hut tax, when the British colonial government, they implemented a tax on all people who had a house or a hut. And the reason for that is because they needed to have black South Africans, they needed the labour in the mines, and they needed labour to build railways and roads, and they couldn't get black Africans who were living in South Africa who were living in a very sustainable economic system where they had cattle, they did good agriculture, and were living quite comfortably off the land, to shift into the mines and into the workforce as they wanted to. And so this hut tax forced households to send men to work in the Western economy and to earn currency that would pay the tax. And that's where things started. And another kind of big landmark in terms of the disenfranchisement of black South Africans was the 1913 Land Act. And that kind of put in law that only 13% of land was given to about 80 to 90% of South Africans. And you can see that, so the white area is what was white South Africa, and there's that patchwork that you can see there were initially the reservations, and then they became the homelands of Bantustans. And under apartheid South Africa, the idea was that these areas would be under black control, that they would be independent, and that they would be self-governing. But of course, it was a bankrupt idea from the beginning, because you can't expect for that patchwork to be economically viable, and to put a whole lot of people into rural areas like that and expect it to be economically sustainable anyway. So what we had is this development of this migrant labor system, where women and children were left at home in the homelands, and men traveled to the cities to work, mostly in the mines of Johannesburg, but also in Cape Town and Durban and many of the other urban centres. And so we laid the foundation for the economic inequality that we still see in South Africa, but also laid the foundations for health disasters like HIV, and the migrant labour system is being seen as one of the big things that caused the spread of HIV in South Africa. So we live in and work in what used to be the Transkei, which is this large area over here, and was the biggest homeland. And to live in and work in a place like this means that you're in an area of South Africa which has been kind of purposefully underdeveloped for most of the time under apartheid. And so very little infrastructure, and it's rural and it's poor. Now, of course, South Africa also, despite our very difficult history, has had a very kind of amazing and miraculous, nearly, transition to democracy, from a white minority rule to democratic multi-party democracy in 1994 under the leadership of Nelson Mandela. I think that many of you will also have read about that and have heard about the amazing gesture that Mandela did at the 1995 World Cup when he wore the rugby jersey of the Springbok white dominated rugby team, and how that brought reconciliation, and how that kind of, where many people thought that South Africa would descend into a war, and we instead found kind of got to a place where there was a stable multi-party democracy. But of course, we're finding that the economic inequities are still significant. And as part of those economic inequities, we have a dual healthcare system. We have a private healthcare system that it takes about 50% of the healthcare budget for about 15% of the people, and about 85% of people rely on the other 50%. And so the government provides free healthcare to most South Africans, or healthcare at a very subsidised rate, but that healthcare system is not working very well. And so we are working in a South African government hospital in a rural area. And that has both benefits and challenges to it. One of the big benefits is that it means that our staff is paid for by the government and our medication is paid for by the government. But it also means that we work in a system that is very red tape and is quite frustrating. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. In terms of how things have gone over the last 25 years, we unfortunately have seen quite a significant underfunding of health and also of education. And as you also probably have read, is initially the South African government's response to HIV was devastatingly poor. In fact, a paper written at Harvard estimated that if we followed the policies, the HIV policies of our neighbour Namibia, 330,000 people would have been alive today that are not because of HIV. So that happened under Thabo Mbeki, and he kind of embraced these alternative views on HIV, which had a massive impact. Thankfully, in 2008, President Zuma came to power, and he appointed a very good healthcare minister, Karl and our policies have changed completely, and we now have some of the best HIV policies in the world, and the biggest ARV program in the world, and that has been, for us, on the ground, been hugely important. Now, unfortunately, despite the fact that Zuma has appointed an excellent healthcare minister, he, as you also probably have read, is known for his the high level of corruption, we even called state capture by his cronies. And I think we are now seeing the impact of that economically, and also how the economic impact of that has impacted on health in South Africa. So that's to just give you a context of where we find ourselves in South Africa now, and where we are, and where we work.
Okay, so Karl showed you the old map of South Africa. This is a current map with 9 provinces, and that old homeland that we were talking about, the Transkei, where we are, we're at the cross. Just superimposed, it's now part of the Eastern Cape province, and we're situated right on the coast. We're in a little rural village, which is about an hour and a half drive from the nearest major town. This is an aerial photo of the hospital, the cluster of buildings at the bottom, and just to give you an idea of what the area is like. So it's quite densely populated in that each of those little huts houses an extended families. There are quite a lot of people, and not much infrastructure. You can see the roads and things are quite rudimentary, but it's very beautiful. It's a government hospital that has about 130 beds and serves a population of about 130,000 people. The hospital includes casualty and outpatients, inpatient facilities for adults and children, 24-hour maternity service including cesarean sections, as well as full rehab services and outreach to 13 clinics. And this is just to put what Karl's already talked about in quite a lot of detail into pictures. So the majority of families live in mud huts with grass roofs, so mostly of the materials that they've gathered and made themselves. And families live in extended families, so there's a large number of people in each of those huts, most of which only consist of one room. And as you can see from the picture, it's very female dominated, and that's largely due to the migrant labour that pulls many of the able-bodied men out of the community to go and find work in order to earn money, because there's not a lot of unskilled jobs, there's not a lot of jobs at all in the area. So the women are responsible for keeping the home fires burning, and they really do everything from collecting cow dung to make their floors, collecting water and firewood, cooking, cleaning, and most of their time is taken up with just activities of daily living, because they don't have running water or electricity, and many of them do now have solar panels, so they might have 2 light bulbs in their house, but certainly nothing like what we're used to. And so I've always said this is a picture that's very charming, but also depicts an enormous amount of suffering. And girls are often up early. If they get to go to school, they're up early doing the household chores. Sometimes it takes up to 3 hours just to collect water, and the water sources are often unclean. And people are poor, unemployment is very high, and literacy rates are terrible, and infrastructure is also very poor. So these are all roads that we travel regularly when they don't look like this. Accessibility to the hospital, even though we have a reasonable array of services now, is still a big challenge. And if it rains, we often have patients who have waded or even swum rivers to get to us, and sometimes they just can't get across. Similarly, it's difficult for us to access our referral services when the roads that ambulance have to travel on look like they're different. That road actually has since been tarred, so we now have a tar road right to the hospital, which has made an enormous difference. But in terms of getting anywhere other than the hospital, it's really very challenging.
So lots of people ask why we ended up where we are, and I think that it depends a little bit. I mentioned in the video that I always was interested in the idea of being a rural generalist, or generalist doing a bit of everything. But I think that as many adventures, it starts through friendships. And Ben and Sharon, who you saw in the video as well, when we were doing what we call a community service here, which is we do 6 years of studying, 1 or 2 years of internship, and then because the government subsidises much of our studies, we then have to do a year somewhere in South Africa in a government hospital, which is called community service. And during that year, Ben and Sharon were in another hospital. They came past us, and we had a kind of very long conversation into the night, and they had always felt called through medical school, we knew about this, to work somewhere in rural South Africa. And we, at that stage, were also working in a rural place in the Eastern Cape, and had fallen in love actually with the Eastern Cape and the Xhosa people. And we just kind of felt that there was a huge need, and that we really felt also called to kind of make a difference in this part of South Africa. So we said to them, listen, we think that you guys, we don't think you should do this alone. We think if the two of you go and try and run a hospital on your own, this is a recipe for burnout. And why don't we come and join you for 5 years, and we can just see if we can get you things going, and then we'll go and do what we want to do and get on with our lives after that. But we feel like that's something that we'd love to do with you. And 11 years later, we are still there. But I think part of the reason why we also, so through friendships and kind of the vision of a group of people that we had at the university, we also really, as white South Africans, we were incredibly privileged, and we came from families who knew of the inequalities, but we were very lucky to be able to get a very good education. And we at the time of 1994, when we started medical school, my first year was in the year that Nelson Mandela was elected as president. There was this kind of sense that we wanted to be part of building this new South Africa, making it a successful country, and kind of trying to break some of the barriers and hurdles. So that was part of it. And another important part for us was also our Christian faith, the sense that we needed to give back. And as I mentioned, having inspirational friends and family, and having family who were prepared to let us go to work in a rural area, I think was pretty important as well, and who supported us in that. So that was very, very helpful. Now, our vision initially was to build a rural hospital of excellence, and we quite soon realized that this word excellence is a bit of a double-edged sword, because sometimes you can try for technical excellence at the expense of people, at the expense of burning your staff out, at the expense of focusing on metrics rather than on kind of outcomes and good outcomes and people and how they feel. So we kind of shifted that to saying, you know what we want is a rural hospital that works. And it was very much from this idea that, and also spoken about by Paul Farmer and those guys who say that why, just because you're poor and rural, should you expect worse care than you do in the city? And so that was our philosophy, and the idea was we really hoped and wanted to build a hospital that would provide a good quality care to a rural community. We also hoped, and it was mentioned also in that video, is that if we had 4 of us there with a fair amount of experience under our belt, that we could provide a core of experience and support for other healthcare workers coming in, and then hopefully that would create sort of a critical mass that could draw people in. And we hope that if we could get more staff, more people with skills to these rural areas where most people don't really want to work, that would have an impact on the health of the community. And we ultimately, in the long term, hoped and dreamed that we might be able to kind of share our experiences and how things have gone, and be able to serve as a model, or kind of give input into policies around rural health in the future. So how do we go about doing this? So at the beginning, it was very much just about doing the basics well. And we focused on, for us, what we thought were the big 4 things in our context, which are HIV, TB, maternal child health. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't think that blood hypertension or diabetes were important, or that we ignored them entirely, but we said, if I want to spend an hour with a patient, I'd rather spend an hour building up systems for HIV than getting, the minutiae of hypertension treatment right. You know what I mean? Because that's really maybe going to add, a few months to a person's life. But if I could prevent a mother from transmitting HIV to that baby, that might actually give that baby an extra 50 days. And so that was kind of, our philosophy. And we're in a context where we are few doctors, we are rationing care, and so we needed to be kind of focused. But we wanted to be focused not on just 1 or 2 things, but to be focused in a fairly broad way. So that was as broad as we could go. And so, as you can see, there are 3 aspects there. The first 2 points is about doing clinical care well. The second part was about actually looking after us as a team, after the healthcare workers. And I think our philosophy was always one of working really hard, but we realized quite soon that the need is endless. And it's very easy just to keep working and burning out. So we also pretty soon put in place rules that said, at 5 o'clock, you can go home. You don't have to stay in outpatient until outpatient is finished. We'll leave the first and second on-call doctors in the outpatient department and go home, because you can't be there every day till 8 o'clock at night, because that is not sustainable. It's much better to be there for 10 years than be there working flat out for 6 months and then burn out and leave. And so that was the first aspect. And the second aspect was we were incredibly privileged and lucky to have a whole lot of specialists who are not connected to the hospital at all, who have no reason for being there, who were prepared through conferences we met them, through friends, who we can phone up at any time of the day or night. And that gives you kind of a great security when you can phone someone who's a specialist, who's prepared to give you advice and understands your context as well. So that was kind of about looking after the staff. And the third part was kind of looking forward and saying, how can we keep drawing people here? And I think a very important aspect was making drawing students in, getting students to come and do electives, coming to spend time with us, because it showed people, first of all, exposure to rural health. And it's been shown that if people get exposed to rural health as part of their undergraduate time, they're much more likely to come and work in rural areas. Also, if we get rural students to do medicine, they're also much more likely to come and work in rural areas. And I think the other aspect was investing in a relationship. And I think we realized quite soon that even though things were not working well at times, or very much not working well at the beginning, one needs to continue to make sure that one doesn't burn bridges. Even if you're very upset with a nurse about how things have been done, you're going to be working with this nurse for the next 10 years. So if you destroy that relationship, in the first 6 months, that is not going to stand you in good stead for the future. So investing in relationships, treating people with respect, but at the same time saying, no, this is not acceptable, this is not acceptable. Trying to find that balance between respect, but also pushing people to do better. So after about 3 or 4 years of being there, we kind of started what we'd learned and what we'd kind of started in those first few steps. We put it into the sense of our core values, and we'll just go through those 6 core values very quickly. But the first thing that kind of goes through everything is this idea of prioritizing patient care. Now that sounds simple and makes sense, doesn't it? But if you're in a hospital and there's all kinds of people, bigwigs from district and from the province who want you to give these stats and do this campaign, it's very easy to get caught up in the paperwork that you get to give to them, the chain of command, rather than actually looking after patients. So coming back to this idea that, patients are the most important, we need to look after them. That paperwork can wait. If we don't finish our amputated patients, if we don't see them well, we can't, that is our first priority. And it's great to have that as a decision-making tool. That this is what we have to do first. And we really kind of want, in a context where we are very busy, we will work very hard, we see lots of patients a day, to also have the sense of connecting with people. It's very easy not to kind of just see people with the numbers and rushing through 60 patients or 70 patients that you have to get through, and to try and make sure that you can't connect with every single patient that you see, but to try and connect with patients every day. And because not only because it's good care, but also because it's good for the doctors to do that. It makes the work much more enjoyable and satisfying. The second aspect was just this, I think in universities worldwide, and hopefully it's just getting better, but there is this incredible hierarchy in the sense that doctors are at the top of the pile, and that, you know, all these other health words, they're useful, but, you know, we're really the people that are making the difference. And I think when we came to Zithulele, we really saw, and we hoped that we weren't like that, but we really saw the value of the allied health professionals, dietitians, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, the whole team, and of course the nurses as well, how important it is as a team that we work together, and how their skills and values and things that they do can make an enormous difference. I mean, I was just thinking about our stroke patients. As a doctor, when you come into our context with a stroke patient, you know, you can maybe give a bit of aspirin a bit later, you might add some hypertensive treatment, but there's really not much you can do. But when we hand them over to our occupational therapists and our physiotherapists, and they transform these people from bedridden patients who have no hope to people who walk out the hospital, you really start respecting those therapists and you realize how much you need them. So we really wanted to value that interdependence as a team and work together as a team for the best outcomes of our patients. The other one thing is this idea of respectful relationships. Now, in a team, in a context where we work hard, in a team where it's very easy for people to feel unhappy at times, or that they're working harder than someone else. And I think that one thing we felt is very important and try and emphasize strongly is that we need to be open and honest on the communication. There's nothing that's worse for a team than when some people speak behind people's backs, and that is not okay. If you have a problem, you need to bring it up to the team and bring it up in front of everybody. And I think that it's important to do that, but also when there are issues, to bring that up in a respectful way. And also to continue to build people up and value them rather than look for the kind of the negative. And so that's been a very important aspect of the way we try to run our team at Zithulele.
Okay, change of voice. The fourth one is providing quality care, and we've spoken quite a lot about that already. And I think that the main focus for us about this is that fact about white, rural, and poor people have worse quality care than anyone else. And obviously that is a challenge because the resources are different. Often the protocols are geared towards urban settings. So it's something that we just try to work at, focusing on quality care, but also appropriateness of our care, and making sure that it's patient-centered. And just an example of that, we have this little catchphrase for our maternity ward, because it's a place where people get tired and frustrated, and often there's chaos, and it's sometimes easy to forget that you're dealing with people and that each of those individuals is going through a very personal, emotional time, and it becomes a bit like a sausage machine. So we use this little phrase called say Jingle Sisiwam, which in Xhosa means as if she were your sister. And it's been really nice to see that. Just to reset the way that you think. If this were my sister, would this be okay? And it recenters you quite quickly. And this is a great picture because it also tells the story. And the gentleman who's being ventilated there is actually one of the security guards at the hospital. He had a terrible asthma attack and he arrested. And we don't have eye care or ICU facilities. So he was ventilated at the hospital through the night by a kind of succession of healthcare professionals and students who kept him alive until it was light enough to call a helicopter to take him to a referral centre. And he is alive and well, and he's currently head of the security now. And so our patients are also our friends and part of our community. Continual learning, and this is an important one for us because I think a lot of people decide not to go rural or to do something kind of off the track for medicine because they're worried that it's a professional dead end. And I think that's a genuine concern because one can get very busy and overwhelmed with the need and then keeping up to date comes second and kind of falls off the to-do list. So we try to focus on that, not only as professionals within the hospital, but also communicating and learning from our community, because most of us are not from the community or even from the same culture, and we've had to really learn, and we've still got plenty to learn. And so we have academic meetings every morning, and that also works well because we're all generalists. It's impossible to keep up with the latest and everything. So each person has their kind of special interest in that way. We can share and try to stay up to date and at least have up to date protocols that are correct for our setting and for the latest research. And the last one I think is the most important and the hardest. And we put that picture there with a question. And what do you see when you look at that? Do you see a broken down house with no roof? Or do you see clean washing on the line? And that is an example of a mom who's really had to work hard to keep her family clothed and clean clothes, and that's no mean feat. There's no washing machines. And just to kind of illustrate that, is the point that if you can change the way you see things, it really changes the way you feel about what you're doing. And that has to be a proactive thing, because it's easy to get into a spiral of being frustrated by a faulty system or the things that go wrong. And if you're in a small community, that just feeds into this large downward spiral. So we try to be intentional about reminding each other to stay hopeful. It doesn't always work, but it is part of the plan. And I think that this comes from the WHO policy guidance on retention of staff. The thing that's helped us to stay the most hopeful, personally, is just the people that we've worked with. And we've spoken a lot about the team and how amazing it is to work with people who want to be and where they are, and how that's really helped us to have energy for what we do every day. So we think this is completely true, and it's definitely our experience. And just to illustrate that in people, that's our team in 2005, or we were part of it then. There's 5 health professionals there, and we arrived in 2006, and the 3 that are not then in turn left. So it was very small, and that's to take in last week. The theme was brightly coloured. We don't always dress that bright. You can see that it's grown enormously, and that's really hopeful for us.
So, metrics are obviously also important. Metrics are not the most important thing. I think sometimes we often feel like it seems to be more important to get the data out back to the head office than to actually look after the patients. But it is also important to have metrics and to show what's happening. And I think, as you can see, this only goes to 2015, but our numbers have increased. So getting healthcare workers there has meant that the community has trusted the hospital a lot more, and as communities trust hospitals more, patients come. And I think that shows it quite well. And our total deliveries, actually, it says in the video, has doubled, but they actually tripled. And our perinatal mortality, again, in the last 2 years, it's got under 20, which is really quite good for our rural setting. And yeah, I mean, you can see in hospital mortality rates, admissions and deaths, and pediatrics also improving. And I think one of the things we find the most rewarding and satisfying is seeing patients who, when we started this video, were dying from HIV, and you know, young people in the prime of their lives being laid low by this disease, and see what the impacts of ARVs of being able to build a program that allows most of them to be managed close to their local community has been one of the most sort of thrilling and exciting parts of what we've done. And it's just been amazing to see not only how the community has been transformed by this, but also about the amazing dedication of the patients, because to take ARVs well is hard. And a lot of people said, well, you know, in poorly resourced places like Africa, people may not be able to take a tablet every single day for the rest of their life with, you know, 95% compliance. And you know, poor Africans do a whole lot better than rich Europeans in taking their ARVs. So that I think has been one of the things that we've so appreciated about our patients.
So, and we've spoken about the team and how that's been kind of key, and what that's done for our medical numbers. But it's also done an enormous amount for outside of the hospital, and that's been fun to watch. I just thought I'd put up there all the people that we work with now in Zithulele. The ones below the heading are people we work with at a distance who have supported us in various ways. And the ones above are all people, all NGOs that actually work in the village doing various things. So I'll just run through them quickly. Jabalani, we started to support the hospital with paper and milk and things like that. And it's gone on to do some educational things and pay for translators. And Grace Vision is an eye organisation that does cataract surgery and screens people for glasses. CBM is a disability community health worker program, so community health workers going out into the community and looking for people with disabilities and feeding them into the system. Mental Mothers is a community health worker program that works in the area, and then the two in the middle are both educational NGOs. The Axiom is a group of people that work supporting the local schools, science and maths and life skills and English. And they do a number of different programs right through from primary school to high school, and they're very inspirational. So if you're interested in education, their website comes up later.
And they're actually having a fundraiser here in Boston on the 3rd of November.
Yeah, they are.
So I'll give you the details and you can get them from Amy, but they're amazing.
And lastly, the Zithulele Independent School is a school we started last year too, that Amy mentioned, that basically is two main points. The first one is to help us to retain our staff because the local schools are really in trouble with huge classes and horrible outcomes. And most of the families that have a choice move once their kids are of school-going age. And so we're trying to retain them for longer than that. So we started the school to help them have an option for their kids, but also to provide an option for the community kids, because over the years with Axiom we've realized that it's not enough to provide support to the schools, but we also need to show the community what we mean when we talk about a different kind of education, because most of the people have only ever seen that, and it's very hard for them to imagine what we're talking about. So it's a very small little model, hopefully, that we are hoping will impact people's view of education and what's possible, so that we can get the community out to advocate for improvements in the local system. So that's a work in progress. We're adding a class a year as we go. So far we've got 3 classes, and we're hoping that we'll eventually have a fully fledged primary school, but we have some way to go before that.
So I think you've heard some of these things already, but it's always, quite nice doing these kind of talks because you reflect on what you've learned and what you'd like to share with people. And I think that the few things that kind of came to us as we reflected on this was kind of the value of being at the coalface of medicine. And I think that being there and having people doing the work is obviously very important, but also the sense that, over 10 years we've slowly chipped away at the health problems of this community, and we often talk about, like we're eating an elephant. It's a big thing, but you can get there bite by bite. But it's going to take a long time. But the only way to eat an elephant is bite by bite, and I think that's kind of where we feel like we still have a lot of the elephant to eat, but we're on the way there, and we have got somewhere, and we can actually see an impact on the community. So that's one thing. Also, as you can see, the value of a committed, unified team has been really significant. And I think the other thing to say is that it's also very important to have long-term leaders committing. And I think when we look at the rural hospitals in South Africa that work relatively well, the kind of key ingredient is a person or a couple like the Gorns who commit there long-term. They pretty much know they're going to be there for the rest of their lives. And to have someone like that, that's irreplaceable, because that gives vision and leadership for the long term, and it makes a huge difference to the stability of that system. We've been surprised, and again that came out in the video, I think, of how many amazing people have chosen to come and work. And once there was this kind of core and this little bit of stability, we realized there's tons of South Africans, and I'm sure tons of people all over the world who want to make a difference. And we've been so inspired by people who've come and spent a year or 2 or sometimes 5 years working with us, and it's been really. And that's been one of the things that we said that has kept us there and keep on keeping us excited about being there. The value of these NGOs that Sally spoke about has been great, and to also have people outside medicine and also impacting on, I think, the other big thing is to impact on education, to actually give people not only to make sure that people are healthy and survive through childhood, but actually that they have something to live for, they get an education and can do something with their lives. And having those NGOs in that way has been incredibly valuable. And again, as we've mentioned, how important it is to build into relationships and to keep relationships at the forefront of everything that you do. So, in terms of sustainability, Do we think that it's sustainable? We hope that at this stage that Zithulele is a sustainable hospital and that healthcare system will continue running even when we go. And we feel very much like we've actually worked ourselves out of a job, and we could, and we're here for 6 months and things haven't fallen apart. So that's really been our hope, is that it could be a place where it draws enough people in. And I think that there are some things that we have been in our advantage, like the incredible, this is the beach, 10 minutes away from us, so that helps to draw people there. But it's, we think it's sustainable, but at the same time we also realize that rural healthcare systems are very fragile. If you have a few key people that leave, the whole thing can collapse. And burnout still remains a challenge. And so we need to guard against particularly our junior doctors who work very hard, that they take time, they look after themselves, and we continue to have a challenge with accommodation, because we live on tribal land. It's not land that you can buy and build things on and be sure that those will be yours 10 years later. So those and that funders are not that keen to fund, accommodation for doctors that might be taken over by the community after 5 years. And so those kind of issues are challenging. Screening is obviously another one which we're hoping to address with this independent school. And I think the other thing just to say is that in terms of rural health, rural health is at the periphery. We are the decision makers. The decision makers are usually in the cities and the universities. And so it's easy for rural health to fall off the agenda. And I think that we realize how important it is to continue to advocate for rural health and to make sure that, for example, some of the doctors who spend 2 or 3 years with us, that they get extra credit for the fact that they've spent their time working in a rural area. They should be first in line for specializations in the clinical students. So we continue to try and do that. But we do believe that it is sustainable and that in the South African context. And we're an interesting place because South Africa has got, in a sense, we're lucky because we have good universities and we've got more skills in the country than most of the rest of Africa. So we have an advantage in that way. But I think that we certainly can see that those skills can be mobilized if you bring them into the right context. I think I want to leave it at that. There's just a few websites that you could go to if you're interested in about Zithulele. Is the hospital website of Lari Foundation, is the NGO that supports the hospital. Axiom is of the education guys, and you can visit the schools there. You can follow us on Facebook as well if you're keen. But yeah, can I hand over to you guys to. Initially people wonder, why are you there? And you're like, well, why are you as a white man working in this very rural area, why are you not making money in the city? And so I think for us, part of it was faith, and African people are generally very spiritual, so they get that. So that builds a bit of trust. And I think the second thing is that you kind of have to get there and you have to do your job well. You got to work with patience and kindness, and that wins people over the wall. So if you provide a good service, that wins trust because people see that you're there to help. And so I think that it's a combination of talking and I think that it's easy for people to have the wrong impression too. And so one has to be careful, be aware of that, and to speak to that and answer questions when they're there. But also then just really to provide a good caring service. And if you do that, people will trust you. And we felt that very strongly, and we feel very safe and looked after by the community, and that they really want us there now.
But I also think it's helpful to have a vehicle that people recognize. And we talk about this a lot because there are a lot of non-profits in the kind of border area, and it's much harder if you come in with an idea and you're starting something from scratch, because then you have to build trust based on nothing. and it's a much longer, it's probably a better way to do it, but it's a longer process. Whereas for us, there was a hospital and a huge amount of need. So all we had to do was, the hospital was government and existed. All we had to do was come in and do a decent job. And already that went a huge, it just made a huge strides towards building at least trust in that piece of what we were doing, because people are sick and they need help. And so I think that is much easier. Building the sort of trust and greater sort of links with the community is much harder. We made loads of mistakes, and we have to kind of rewind and start again. And yeah, we've learned loads, and I'm sure we're going to learn.
Under the theme, kind of doing the basics well, how do you define kind of what are those 3 huge issues that you're going to really focus on that are going to make the most impact within a particular community?
Yeah, I think we basically, you got to decide that yourself, and you got to look at what's there. I mean, in the South African context, the things that you see every day and that really hit you every day are those 4 things: HIV, TB, maternal health, and child health. Those are the things that keep us busy. And so we felt that if we did them well, and we focused on them and we invested in them, it was kind of just a needs assessment in a sense. And those were the things that we saw most of the time that we found the most difficult to handle. And we also thought if we could just get on top of this problem, things would be a little bit easier. So that's kind of hard.
I think they just found us. I mean, I don't think it's always going to be like that, but that they just were the things that if we didn't do something about, we were just going to have lots of sick and dying people. So, and also, again, when there's nothing, it's so much easier because there were already things we could do straight away. I mean, just bringing ARVs in, it's not that hard. They already existed. We just had to bring them in and have a system which developed over time. So I think it's also, at that level of care, it would be much harder in a tertiary hospital to try and pick your 4 important things. So those were just the things that were killing the most people when we got there, and probably are still killing the most people this year.
Karl?
Did you find any challenges in cultural barriers in terms of their conception of healthcare versus their conception of healthcare? How did you navigate that?
So many, and so humbling. You come in with your background of Western medicine and how you can fix stuff, and realize that not everybody sees that your idea of fixed is fixed. And I mean, yeah, it's a minefield. We have a big language barrier, a huge cultural barrier, and negotiating with traditional medical practitioners, or traditional healers, and there's no easy way to do that. It's hard, and we mess up, and we've just learned over time, and also it takes time. You need to build relationships with people for them to tell you the truth, and it's sometimes only years later that someone turns around and goes, actually, somebody told me once, and I keep saying, why did you not tell me this earlier? When you're really quiet and you examine me, it's terrifying, because I think you have to concentrate really hard if you're quiet, and that means something terrible is wrong. Whereas my experience is I don't want the doctor to be chatting away while they must be focusing on looking at me. So my cultural perception is I'm doing the right thing, and from their cultural perspective, it's just scary. So lots of those things, and those just come out in the wash. I mean, we can't expect to know until people tell us, and we just try to be sensitive and respectful and ask.
I think it is about asking and being aware of that our perspective are very different. I think that one of the things that we find at the beginning very common is that people would say, why? And if you think about a traditional healer context, people go and say, why? And it's often, well, your ancestors are angry, or you need to do this, or so there's a reason. And sometimes, Western medicine doesn't give a very good reason. Why am I diabetic? Well, it's your genetics, or you've eaten a bit too much sugar, or you're a little bit overweight. But people want to know why, and sometimes so one has to engage that, and sometimes it's not. My answer isn't satisfying, and I also don't want to say, well, you've got a snake inside of you biting your tonsils. That's why you've got so much pain in your throat. You know, and that's sometimes a cultural explanation. And I'm going to give you some antibiotics, and these antibiotics are going to kill that snake. You know, that would be a very satisfying answer. But is it a true answer? You know, and is it a helpful answer? And it's hard. So you're going to kind of have to negotiate that. And I think the other thing is to continuously ask questions and ask people and people. I mean, we have a complex history. You know, Black South Africans have been subjugated, and they don't. There's this kind of. Yeah, I mean, one has to be explicit in asking things because people won't tell you because they've been so hurt by telling people or speaking up before that they're scared that people will get offended. So one has to actually take that step. And then it also helps to have healthcare workers that are speaking from the culture. And so, although most of our staff, as you can see, are white South Africans, we do have had more and more. And I think one of the challenges is that we have still got a very, we have more and more black doctors, but there's still a huge pressure on them to be working and making lots of money and looking after their family. So it's really, our parents are not always delighted that you're in rural medicine, but if you, as a first generation out of poverty, are working in a rural area where you get paid a little bit less than a private cardiologist would, that's not okay. So the vast majority of our black colleagues have huge pressure on them to make lots of money and to kind of really make it. So we struggle to retain them. We get them for a few years sometimes, and but every time we have a few of the also speakers there, the richness of what they bring is also very valuable.
Could I just intervene for a second? One of the things I was really struck by was when you told the story of the security man and how they had vented the entire night and then he quit and now he's the head of security. And I was really touched by Amy talking about that evening and the lamp and everything else that was going on in your accessible home. Could you tell us each a day of your work? Give it just a narrative, like a little story of any day that is worth telling us about. I'm sure there are many, but just a little story. There's a lot of data that you're giving us and background, but a narrative that's important for you to convey to us what life in this hospital is like. And separate ones.
Yeah, you want a day of life, basically.
It could be an hour.
Yeah, okay.
It could be a good hour.
My favorite time of the day is going to work in the morning. So our house is in a complex where some of the professional staff live, and it has fence around it, so we kind of have to walk down the driveway to get into the community. But it's such a progression. It takes me about, if I were to walk from my front door to so I work as a teacher at the school now most of the time, so I think from my house to school, if I just walk, it would take about 5 minutes. But I'll come out, and then the little next door neighbor will run out, maybe in his pajamas, and go, "Wait, I'm nearly ready for school." And then maybe we'll wait for him, and then we call it the school bus, and we walk our school bus around, and somebody will come out on their way to the hospital with a mug of coffee and kind of wave and run because everybody's always late. And then we'll stop in with the security guard and say, "Oh, doctor, I didn't sleep at all last night. My head is really sore and it goes down here." And then, and so a little consultation there, and then you get outside, and the pastor's wife, she had polio as a child, and so she walks very slowly, and she'll be taking her grandson, and their chickens and goats, and it takes such a long time, and it's always like that. I'm forever apologizing for being late because I forget to take into account how many medical consultations and greetings I'm going to do, or quickly passing a school report to the mom whose kids in my class who sells fruit, and so she only earns what she sells that day, so she never comes to any meetings with me because I just accept that I go to meetings with her. So if I have to hand in Indy's report, then I might stop her because she's at her table early in the morning setting up. And it's lovely. It's everything I do in a little microcosm before I even get to school. And then the last little part, and as we go up the little hill, is past this little guy who's in my class, and he lives in a caravan across the street in the school, and he waits. And as soon as he sees us coming up the hill, he runs so he can be first, and then because he wants to open the classroom door. And that's before the day really officially starts. But it's just so different to, you want to say something.
I sometimes beat him there.
Sometimes you beat him there. So yeah, I mean, I could go on and tell more about the day, but I think that's what kind of makes it different to city life. It happens, life happens to you along the way, and that just makes it rich for me. I really enjoy it. Sometimes it's tiring, and often it makes you late.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think, I didn't mind this. After that, it's mine come after that. But
Maybe you could give like a specific story that you remember that you were involved in.
well, I mean, I think. Oh, yes. Oh, wow. That was a day. So this is also a little bit medical, but this was on the 31st of December 2007 when we had, so we had 3 doctors who joined us as community service doctors. So, like we were when we met Bernard on that photo, and they had spent the whole year with us, and they asked if they could leave on the 31st, and we thought, you know what? We'll be nice and we'll let them go a day early because they then had to get up to their next job. So we let them off. So it was just me, Sally, Ben, and Taryn. And Sally was, yes, you were very pregnant with Johan. With Emma. Anyway, that's not. What is it, Emma? And so.
What about
Can't remember. Anyway, but so we had, I mean, this crazy day where we had a full OPD. Of patients, and maternity just went crazy. And so I don't know if any of you have heard of something called cord prolapse. It's when the umbilical cord prolapses before the baby's head, and that's a life-threatening emergency because if the head squashes on the cord or the cord starts spasming, then the baby doesn't get any oxygen, and there's basically 5 minutes to go. The way you treat it is one of the doctors will put their hands in the mom's vagina, push the heads up, gets the cord in there. The mom will be in a knee chest position, so she'll be with her bum in the air. You'll put her on a trolley, you'll get her into the theatre as quickly as possible. And so Sally was unfortunately the person who done the vaginal examination, so that means that you keep your hand there and hold her head up, and we rushed her in a very pregnant state on the trolley all the way up to maternity up to theatre, and we had that cesarean section, which was then followed very quickly by another 2 cesarean sections as the whole OPD started heaving more and more and more, and it was one of those days where you were, why were we that nice? But that was quite a day, yeah.
I think the winning comment for that day was, so there were 2 people already in theatre, and it was me and Ben, I think, running this patient, leading this patient up in the rain, and he said, he was running, pushing us, and he said, some days I just feel like I'm really on ER.
So I also studied in South Africa, and I had the opportunity to volunteer at the Dennis Hurley HIV clinic. And I was wondering, you touched on Tom and Becky's handling of HIV, and I was wondering if you have found success in educating your community on HIV transmission and the causes of it, or if you find that they have adopted these views.
I think we were lucky. I mean, we've had to work through a lot of, it's been going a long time, we've had to work through a lot of issues. And I mean, I think we'd be completely lying if we said we'd successfully educated everybody, but I think we've seen probably our biggest gains in HIV just because the system is designed to educate the patient properly, and I think it's the only place we do that. So especially our first patients, I mean, they used to panic the day of the initiation because they had to answer all these questions, and we were very strict with them because we didn't have resources to, they had to succeed. We actually sent our first patients to start at a neighboring hospital, so they got a bus ride and everything. And so I think we, Tom and Becky's kind of alternative health solutions for HIV didn't really filter down in a big way to who we are. I mean, what you think about? But I mean, Western medicine and time, like doing things by time, and those sorts of challenges have been big hurdles. And infant feeding has been a big one for us with HIV. And trying to explain things that we understand by looking at numbers to people who are not convinced by numbers is very challenging at the level of the nurses and at the level of the patients. So that's an ongoing work, but I felt we made lots of progress.
I mean, I think there are two things. I think there's the one side is that do everybody's work, and it's abundantly clear that they work. There's such good medication that nobody can question the fact that you see people who are on death's door who are as thin as a rag, and 6 months or a year later they look human and healthy and well, and they can go back to the mines or they can go back to work. So that is so obvious. So people believe in ARVs. They believe that they work and they use them, and they use them well. But we haven't really won on the prevention side. And I think that's partly because the health and HIV community don't completely agree about how we should approach it. And we believe very strongly that concurrency is a significant factor and that we need to address it. We need to address it honestly. But sometimes, saying being faithful is seen as it's a moralistic thing we're doing. We're saying faithfulness is a survival strategy. And it's not a moralistic thing that we're trying to put on people. And of course we want, people to be protecting themselves anyway. But I think that there's this kind of denial. There's one group of people say the only thing we need to focus on is abstaining. The other group of people say condoms, and we kind of get stuck in this ridiculous cultural war, which is killing patients. And so I think that for us, I think all of those things are important, but I think the one thing that people don't talk about enough is faithfulness. And the hard thing about faithfulness is that you need two people to tango. So that's the hard thing. But I think that we still need to give that information, and very few people, even in the healthcare community, know about concurrence. And I think that's a very important thing that we need to talk about.
Andrea? Thank you very much for a very beautiful presentation. You showed difficulty they have in gathering water. So can you tell us something about the possibilities of projects for development? We think of the social determinants of health. Water is one of them, one of the factors. Education is the other. So we're trying to move in this area of a sort of more comprehensive attention to the needs and the development, the steps in of development of the population. Can you tell us something else besides education? Let's say, for example, water or roads or solar panels, something else that has an impact on that.
Water is probably, it's one of the biggest impacts, isn't it? Because, and sewage. And so, we've had a massive project in our area where they've built a dam and they pipe water to most households. So they make communal taps, but it's been a multi-million-dollar project, which hasn't been that successful. So sometimes we feel like it would have been better just to give people water tanks and roofs that are not grass to be able to collect their own water, and just a little bit of jick would be the answer in our
I feel like if we had health sorted out and we were looking for something else to do, the next thing we would do is look for water and sanitation, and we'd have to think out the box because it's a really hilly area to put conventional, or what we think of as conventional water and sewage in there is very expensive, but also like what we know now about environmental sustainability is not necessarily even the right idea. So it'd be nice to see someone who knows a lot about that coming in and having a go. I definitely think water tanks would be really useful, especially in summer. We get really good rainfall in summer, and that's not so expensive. To give every family a big tank and somehow, even if it's just a section of the roof. But also to look at toilets that composting toilets, or quite a lot of people have got latrines, but most people just use the bush and then it rains and everything goes downhill. So that's a huge. That would make a huge impact on health. I think we have seen a major impact. We get these diarrhea seasons every year, but with our rotavirus vaccine, and that's a new one that's been routinely introduced into our immunisation schedule, and that's definitely made a big impact. But I mean, the water sources are still a huge problem, so that's got to be number one on the list, I think, in hand with sanitation. And sustainable agriculture, I think is another one. You know, and we've tried a bunch of things, and nothing has been particularly successful. But I think that's another thing that would be not too difficult to do given our climate and rainfall for at least half the year, and that would also make a very big impact on health. People need to better diversify their crops, to look after their land a bit better, and maybe look a bit more at the old strategies. I used to run a malnutrition clinic, and we stopped doing it because it was just kind of fruitless. There was this communication, and then it fell apart at home. And I think it's largely to do. We started giving seeds out to these grannies who look after the children, and said, you know, grow these seeds, diversify, but it can't just be cabbage and maize. You've got to have other vegetables. And then we realized that we weren't helping at all because people couldn't fence their land. People's livestock is roaming freely. So, I mean, goats, number one, hazard. Baby chickens. I mean, it's just impossible to look after your seedlings that have a really good fence, and fencing is expensive. But people used to use more traditional methods of fencing before. So I think there's lots of scope. I mean, there's lots of scope to look at quite simple things that could really make a difference. We need more people if anyone's interested.
So the last question: have you tried to do community-based medicine or outreach? So training the community in basic first aid to try and avoid smaller issues, snowballing into larger issues where then they are required to go to the hospital if earlier intervention could have prevented hospitalization.
Yeah, so one of the NGOs, Pilani, is basically a health worker program. So they call the community health workers mental health. And the idea is, so they work closely with us in the hospital, and part of my research is actually evaluating whether they have an impact on communities. And so what they do is they are community members, they're also speaking, they're trusted by the community. Have you heard of the idea, anybody of you know the idea of a positive deviant? That sounds very weird actually, doesn't it? But the idea is that in every community, every poor community, there are people, women in that community, who are equally poor as everybody else, but their children are fine. So they are positive deviants. They deviate from the norm of poverty and malnutrition. And what are they doing? So we're trying to choose those women in communities that are positive deviants, that have skills that are not taught to them by a white doctor sitting in the hospital, but are realizing, I need to add a little bit of oil to the porridge, or I'll put peanut butter on rather than jam, or whatever it is. And using those women and training them, with basic health stuff. So the mental mother model is focused on maternal and child health, but the idea is that they go wider than that. And they then walk in communities and walk from home to home and then do home visits and get people in and look for malnourished kids. And the way they get into the household is by saying, would you like to have your kids weighed? Everybody wants to know if the kids are growing well. We can see if they're growing well. So that's a great entry point into the house. And then once you enter into the house like that, it allows you to identify, there's a mom who's pregnant. Well, and then you can open a folder for her and you can follow up and make sure she goes to the clinic. And so the whole idea is actually to start off with the pregnant moms, or even before women are pregnant, so that if they have good behavior, if we look after them through pregnancy, they get all the stuff they need, they test for HIV, that can mean that we have less malnutrition next week. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. They're not kind of first aid people, but they are healthcare resources that are there and also are speaking from the community who people trust, and that makes a huge difference.
We'd like to thank you.